So again, we want to welcome everyone to our meeting this morning. And to get our meeting started, we'll give our attention to Brother Kenny Gutierrez of the Huron Spanish congregation. And the theme of his talk is Your View of Authority Matters to God. Brother Gutierrez.
Authority. Authority is a word that is not very popular in the world that we live in today. I think we can all agree on that. Authority gives a connotation to many in this world that is suffocating, restrictive. They don't like to be told what to do, and much less deal with the consequences afterwards. But this world is so propagated with this thought that we see it all around us, and it doesn't have to be from too far back or even in many years ago. If we think back just to a few years ago, in the late 60s, in October of 1969, we see this viewpoint in Montreal, Canada. In this certain day in October 1969, for one day, law enforcement, the authority figures in this town, decided to go on strike. Matter of fact, it wasn't even one day, it was 15 hours. What do you think happened during the course of those 15 hours where there was no law enforcement in this town? Rioting, ransacking, all kinds of disruptive social unrest for those 15 hours at the hands of opportunists, criminals, and just habitual lawbreakers. But an interesting thing to note, an eyewitness that was there mentioned the following about the common or ordinary citizen. He said, "I do not mean to say that criminals or habitual lawbreakers, I mean to say that ordinary people committed crimes that they would not dream of if there was law enforcement around the corner." And mentioned little things like running the red light, jumping onto opposite lanes of traffic actually at high speeds, doing things that supposedly were insignificant, however still showing a total disregard for law because they knew there was going to be no consequences. Well, as ordinary people that we consider ourselves, law-abiding citizens, it begs the question, how do we see authority? Is it something that we simply tolerate because we have to? And then given the moment or the opportunity, if it presents itself, then we just totally disregard it? It's important to analyze this question. How do we truly feel in our heart? Well, Jehovah God in His Word gives us instruction of how should we view authority today. And if you follow me in your Bibles, we're going to start noticing this view. If you'll follow me to Proverbs 24:21. Let's read here. Proverbs chapter 24, verse 21. We'll see what Jehovah's view is on this. And it says here, verse 21, "My son, fear Jehovah and the king, and do not associate with dissenters." You'll see here that God's word teaches us to show respect for those who have authority over us. Here it mentions to fear Jehovah, obviously, but to fear the king too, someone who has authority over us here. And notice at the end, it says, do not associate with dissenters. If you notice, if you have the electronic version, or if you have your Bible reference, the footnote there says, or to those who are for a change. This is important because Jehovah doesn't want us to focus on the political system here. There's no reason for us to get involved truly with civil unrest, for radical changes in society. No, He wants us to have the proper viewpoint of the authority that ultimately He delegates. We understand, and in light of this tendency of the world to have total disregard for authority, we ask ourselves, whose authority should we view? Whose authority should we fully respect, and why? Well, as true Christians, we recognize that respecting Jehovah's authority as ultimate or overall sovereign will help us to benefit in the way that He delegates it today. As a matter of fact, Jehovah has already demonstrated since the beginning of creation how He's the best and most indicated person to teach us how to respect authority. If you think back to even in our bodies, right, when Jehovah created us, what happens? Think about this. What happens when you don't eat for a few hours? Isn't it true that our body starts to tell us in a very authoritative way, demanding us that we need to eat, we need to replenish our energy? Yeah, that's something that Jehovah has put in there for our protection. But not just that, not only is it for our protection and for our physical benefit, but think about this. What happens when you're famished and they serve you your most favorite dish? Or you're so thirsty and you drink a cold cup of water? We derive pleasure from it even. See, Jehovah is that type of God. He gives us not only the physical benefit, but he lets us enjoy it and derive pleasure from it. And there are things external to our body too. Thinking about, for example, the authority that gravity, right, the force of gravity on this earth. Everything is in its place thanks to how Jehovah has designed that. And mankind has recently worked in harmony with that. And when they do that, they've developed now the plane, something that goes against the force of gravity. Imagine that. It's just another example of how we truly benefit, right? Working in harmony with it, but also listening and obeying to the authority that Jehovah has already shown us that he can delegate. And this afternoon, we're going to consider a few other areas, specifically 3 different areas in which Jehovah wants us to fine-tune, to really share his view on authority. And the first one will be in the family, authority in the family. The second one is the superior authorities or governmental authorities, and then also recognizing and respecting the supreme authority, which is Jehovah God. But let's touch on this first one here first. We're going to talk about the authority in the family, and when thinking about this, we really come to realize that the family arrangement as it stands, something that, by the way, has been designed and set up by Jehovah himself, is going through such a hard time today. It's a true epidemic when we think about the family arrangement and how it's being disregarded nowadays. We think that the statistics here in the United States, the statistics show that every 10 to 15 seconds there's one divorce. 10 to 15 seconds. That means that during the duration of this talk, or this discussion here, there's going to be approximately 120 couples. 120 couples that at first said, I do, will say, never mind. And often it's for little things. And we see how the incorrect view of Jehovah's authority can really affect that arrangement in all of us, really, in a very real way, right? So we want to understand how is it that Jehovah has delegated the authority in the family. And we'll see this principle here in 1 Corinthians. If you follow me there, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3 says, But I want you to know that the head of every man is the Christ. In turn, the head of every woman is the man. In turn, the head of the Christ is God. So here we see very clearly, right? Jehovah is a God of order. And here he established that order of the headship. And so when we think about this arrangement, and we notice that Christ is here mentioned twice, right? Head of the man, but also he also has a head. We think about the example that Christ is. He really is a perfect example for each member of the family. You think about husbands. Jesus Christ is the perfect example for husband, because he showed with his life to the extent of his love, right? For the congregation, for his disciples, he was willing to give up his life. And so looking at that, husbands can really see Jesus as a perfect example. Wives can look to Jesus to be a perfect example, because he too has a head, and he was submissive and loyal to the very end. And children can see Jesus as a perfect example too, because of his obedience from the heart to obey Jehovah God. So we think about every person's role in the family. Well, we can look to Jesus, right, to be a perfect example. Husbands, we do well in reflecting whether or not our conduct in our family truly is imitating Jesus Christ. Think about the times where he had to deal with the problems even with his disciples. He never berated them. He never humiliated them, belittled them. No, he showed true love to the point, as we mentioned, to giving his own life for them. So we're responsible before Jehovah as husbands how we exercise the authority that he's lending us in our family, recognizing that it comes from him. Also, recognizing that our wives, you know that the scriptures, our dear wives are referenced there as a weaker vessel, a more delicate vessel. The key word there is weaker, right? That means that we ourselves are weak too. And we recognize that we fall short of Jehovah's expectations day in and day out. And so keeping that in mind helps us to be humble and exercise that in a very loving way. We want to be, we're going to be responsible, and we want to do a good job at it. Jehovah leaves us with a perfect example to follow. Wives are also responsible before Jehovah for the attitude they have towards the direction of the husband, and the attitude they cultivate in the children, if there are any present. So it's really important that even if the wife has a husband who isn't applying Bible principles, Jehovah still wants that respect to be shown. Of course, this is assuming that there's no conflict between God's law, right? If there's no conflict, Jehovah wants that respect to be shown, both in the wife and the children. Ultimately, she shows respect for the person who instituted this arrangement, which is Jehovah, right? She wants to be in total submission and have deep respect to her husband. And this is especially true when there are children. I don't have children, we don't have children, but I was a child, and I was a very troublesome child. So I know that it can be difficult when there are children involved. And Jehovah has made this arrangement because it's a team, right? Jehovah has made the husband and wife as a team and given each a role. Now, to illustrate that a little bit, I think back to how, with projects and construction that's been happening lately, if you think about it, would you ever try to hammer something with a saw? Or would you ever try to saw something but with a hammer? It's kind of funny to think about it, right? It doesn't make sense. See, each tool has its role, and the project will get done if we follow it. Well, the same thing, that family arrangement, Jehovah has set it up a certain way. Each person has a role, and the project will get completed if those roles aren't confused. So Jehovah provides that direction, especially when there are children involved, so that it can be done in a way that is appropriate. Now, speaking of children, sometimes as children, we obey, but we obey with a mopey attitude sometimes. And my mom used to say, why can't you just obey it without the long face? And so that shows us that obedience is great, it's excellent, but does it come from the heart? Do you truly feel it? And we know that as children, we have to be respectful of our parents. See, Jehovah is lending the authority to mom and dad. They have the authority in the family. And so we have to be obedient, because that will truly make Jehovah's heart rejoice. See, as parents, they respect that authority by making sure that the discipline and correction is happening in the family, so as to not let the kids control the situation, right? That's showing respect, showing the right view of authority in the family arrangement. So we see that if every member of the family has the correct view of authority, there will be peace. Jehovah has originally established that it's a perfect arrangement, and so Jehovah wants us to enjoy from the benefit, right? The peace that it will exist there. Now, we talked a little bit about the family. Let's talk a little bit now about the superior authorities, the governmental authorities that exist today. It's true that it can be difficult sometimes to show respect for an institution that is so unjust. Because Jehovah is a God of justice, and we serve the God of justice, so we don't really like to see all these injustices in the world. People being treated, if we think back just to a few weeks of protests, it's just difficult to show respect sometimes for this arrangement. But with all that said, let's see where in the scriptures Jehovah helps us to view it the way he does. And if you'll open up with me to Romans chapter 13, we're going to see a few scriptures there, a few verses. We'll start with verses 1 and 2. Romans chapter 13, verses 1 and 2. It says, let every person be in subjection to the superior authorities, for there is no authority except by God. The existing authorities stand placed in their relative positions by God. Therefore, whoever opposes the authority has taken a stand against the arrangement of God. Those who have taken a stand against it will bring judgment against themselves. So we notice how this scripture helps us to see that there really is no authority. This arrangement wouldn't exist if it wasn't by Jehovah God. He's the one that's allowing this to happen. And we see that they're in their relative position. Doesn't mean that Jehovah is putting certain people in power. That's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches that Satan is in control of the system. But Jehovah allows them to be in a relative position because it's a very temporary purpose that they're fulfilling now. So we see that Jehovah is gearing our thoughts. Right? We want to show respect and give it the right importance. As a matter of fact, notice what verse 4, the phrase that's used here, how important it is for Jehovah here. It says, "For it is God's minister to you for your good." That's an interesting phrase or word that he uses. God's minister. That literally serves a purpose for Jehovah. And so if we jump down now to verse 6, we'll see how it can be of service to us. Notice verse 6 says, "That is why you are also paying taxes, for they are God's public servants, constantly serving this very purpose." Yes, they have the required authority to bring, to a certain degree, order in society, but also to provide public services. Now, if you think to this country, what kind of public services do we benefit as law-abiding citizens that Jehovah wants us to be? Well, simple things. For example, the mail system, right? Mail services, education services, and to a certain extent, also protection from crime, right? Those are all things that we benefit from in having the right view of authority here, respecting the authority and paying the taxes as we're commanded to in the Bible. So we can see true benefit, right? But also, it's not just what do we receive. If you notice now, look what else is involved in verse 5. Helps us to see this point. It says, "There is therefore compelling reason for you to be in subjection, not only on account of the wrath, but also on account of your conscience." So this shows the weight that Jehovah puts on this respect that we should show. Our conscience is involved. Our very relationship with Jehovah can see itself affected if we don't have the right view and show respect for the authority that Jehovah is delegating to the governmental or the superior authorities nowadays. And like we mentioned earlier, we know it can be tough, right? We don't like those injustices, but it's much like when someone undergoes through surgery. Perhaps some in the audience have had some procedures done. Myself, I've had a surgery, shoulder surgery, about 2 years ago. When the surgeon is finished with the surgery, he uses stitches, right? And stitches are something that are external to the body, really shouldn't be there, but it's serving a temporary purpose. It's giving cohesion to the parts, bringing together the parts of the skin that need to heal up and create a scab and all that. Removing the stitches prematurely, well, that can be damaging to our health, right? It can cause infections or worse. And in a very similar way, these governments are much like those stitches. See, they're external to Jehovah's original purpose. They weren't even supposed to be here to begin with. But they do serve a temporary purpose. They bring cohesion to a certain point. They bring together society so that there's some order. And removing it prematurely, well, that would be very damaging, as we see in certain countries today, that there's civil unrest. So we see that Jehovah is an expert at what he does. He knows how to delegate, and so for the time being, it's serving a temporary purpose. We know ultimately he will do away with it. So it's important for us to have the right mindset, view it like Jehovah as a temporary solution for the problems that exist today. Now, when we talk about how Jehovah delegates, well, we have to show importance and respect to how he is the above sovereign, the most sovereign, right? The most high. He has the supreme authority. And that expression, we see it in Psalm 83:18, where we find Jehovah's name. He is the most high. He is the supreme authority. And so whether it be family arrangement or governmental authority, if any of those have a conflict with Jehovah's law, well, we must obey Jehovah's law above man's law. And that's the truth. Jehovah is lending all this authority, and so we show respect that. We show respect for that. By doing this, this also translates to how Jehovah delegates in this third environment, which is delegating authority in the congregation. We see how Jehovah is a master at this, and so when we think about the congregation arrangement, we would definitely want to have his viewpoint on how we should respect the authority in the congregation. Why don't we see that, please? Let's see how he's done that in Hebrews 13:17. If you follow me, please, to Hebrews chapter 13, verse 17. Here again, we'll see his view on it and how we can gear our thoughts towards that too. Hebrews 13:17 says, Be obedient to those who are taking the lead among you, and be submissive, for they are keeping a watch over you as those who will render an account, so that they may do this with joy and not with sighing, for this would be damaging to you. So here we see those two expressions, right? To be obedient to these men that are taking the lead, and to be submissive. Now we know that in the scriptures, we see that the congregation elders fulfill this role. Congregation elders are seen as gifts and men. They're seen as shepherds. And so this role that they have, the work that they have, well, we want to make it easier for them. And we as congregation are part of the flock that they have to shepherd. And so we want to do this in a way that they don't do it with sighing, because it would be ultimately damaging to us. So we show respect for the way that Jehovah is delegating that. And notice how it says to be obedient and be submissive. Obedience is great when we agree with it, right? When I agree with you, I'll obey. But what happens when we have a disagreement? Well, that's when submissive comes into play, right? Being submissive is, even though there may be a disagreement, we still obey, and with the right attitude too, because ultimately it's for our own benefit. So putting this view in our mind helps us to see that Jehovah has this arrangement for a reason. And we know that these men, congregation elders, we see the work they do, especially in areas like this where there's a great need for shepherds. As a congregation, we see the hard work that they do. As a matter of fact, sometimes we don't see it. Perhaps their families are the only ones that see it. Sleepless nights. Also, taking the lead in the congregation. I mean, sometimes these brothers have to take 1 or 2, 3 assignments in midweek meeting. It can be difficult. It can weigh on them as stress. And so we want to be obedient. We want to be submissive. Imagine for a moment if, when talking about the counsel and how they give loving counsel, imagine for a moment that an angel were to come and say to you, Kenny, I noticed, Jehovah noticed that you need to work on this, you need to work on that, oh, and this too. If an angel were to tell us things that we need to work on, things that Jehovah noticed in us, how would we react? Jehovah noticed, okay, yep, I'm going to work on that, and checklist, and check. Now, well, what happens when an elder gives us a counsel? A lot of things happen before that conversation. So many other steps happen. See, the elder has to notice something first. And they go home, meditate a little bit on it, pray for sure, look up information. And then perhaps the next time they see us isn't the time that they talk to us about it. Perhaps they go home and they wait for the right moment, pray again as they're giving the counsel to make sure that they do it in a tactful, loving way so that it actually reaches our heart. See, there's so much that goes involved with the love and the guidance that these elders are giving us. So then how do we react? Well, we need to see ultimately who that counsel is coming from. We don't say, oh, he's my friend. I'm okay. I know I'm okay. Or we won't say, did you see the way this brother told me that, and he still wants me to? No, we wouldn't do it to an angel. Well, we would definitely not do it to a congregation elder. This is Jehovah's guidance that's coming to us. And so, again, Jehovah has established this for a reason. He knows the protection that we need, and he shows his love that way. So, ultimately, we recognize Jehovah's authority is going to last forever. He's established the Messianic kingdom, and so there's no reason to think that even in the New World, things will change in the way he delegates the authority. In the New World, it's still expected that parents and husbands will take the lead. He will still delegate that way. And also, it's also apparent that there are going to be earthly representatives here that are going to have authority over certain arrangements. And perhaps we can think back to a little less than a year ago, a Watchtower article came out and talked about how where we want to live in paradise, by the beach, by the mountains, by a river. Well, that article brought out how there's still going to be an order that needs to be followed, right? And so these brothers are going to have authority over these arrangements, and so we'll want to show respect now. We'll want to have that view of Jehovah's authority now, because it'll be much easier to do in the New World. And this kind of reminds me a little bit of, perhaps you've seen the diet pill ads. It's funny to think about, but you see that they have these advertisements and they have this little pill and it says, if you take this pill, you could look like this. And they have an image of very muscular man or woman, fit, healthy. All you gotta do is take this pill. Well, we know, I hate to burst any bubbles, but we know that it takes more than just a little pill, right? It's not an overnight thing. The people that we see on those images or those photographs, they have years and years of a strict regimen, both diet and exercise. It's not an overnight thing that's happened for sure. And so, in the same way, if we think about it, it takes time to cultivate the respect and the view of authority. So if now we struggle or we notice that we kind of need to align our thoughts with Jehovah, then now is the time to do it. Because if we struggle now to obey and be submissive in any of these arrangements that we talked about today and the way he delegates authority, then you can't expect that just upon entering the new world, we're going to have this newfound sense of obedience, this newfound sense of submission. No, it takes time, and we can start now. And many of us have started already, and that's excellent. We need to show Jehovah that we support his sovereignty and his way of delegating authority, because ultimately it's to our benefit and our protection. And show Jehovah also that not only do we want to live in the new world, but that we can live in the new world. So friends, if we do this, ultimately we will show Jehovah both now and for the rest of eternity that we share his view on authority.
Thank you, Brother Gutierrez.